We refer to this next guy, perhaps at Guitar Town, as the straw that stirs the drink. A terrific go-to guitar player, mandolin player, clarinet player, oud, B3, you name it, bluegrass, jazz, rock, country, John Jorgenson. Right And this guy, whom we are very pleased to have back here at Guitar Town.
I'm happy to be here.
And before I even introduce him, I'd like to point out the sartorial specialness here. The blue of the shirt matching the blue of the socks.
Well, you know, a guy has to have some fashion sense.
This is impressive.
My wife would be, you know, upset if I came up here with brown socks.
Yeah. As with these folks.
Yeah, and my daughters would go, oh,
But nonetheless, a guitar player known around the world, has been thrilling audiences everywhere for, dare we say, decades. Truly one of a kind. We're so glad he's back. Tommy Emmanuel, right there. This gentleman began his career in London as a session guitar player. Had extraordinary success at a very young age, and along the way met a guy named McCartney. Yeah.
Never heard of him.
And he played in a band called Wings, which Laurence joined for 2 years? 3 years. 3 years. Laurence has since gone on to become a master fingerstyle guitar player. He's a composer, he's an arranger, he is a songwriter, one of the best. Please say hi to Laurence Juber. And sort of hiding as he gets set up there, a young man who won the Australian version, Australia's Got Talent, I believe, a number of years ago. That does not nearly begin to describe his musicianship, his technique on guitar, remarkable, and continues to get better. You'll hear that later. Please welcome Joe Robbins.
Yeah.
More to come, but to begin, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about the art of collaboration and listening. And what these guys, these are all stellar artists in their own right. My guess is, and I think that's been borne out, they are stellar collaborators. So, Tommy,
yes,
tell me, you know, or show me even, when you're, you know, when you're presented with a situation, just as it happened right here.
Yeah.
You know, what are you first listening for when you start to play?
The first thing you listen for is the structure of the song and the chords, so you know what you're playing over, and that you know what you can support the other player with, right? So the moment that Laurence started to play, I could tell he was in D. He was going. I also could tell he had a different tuning on his guitar. So and that didn't faze him one bit. But we just felt like playing a little blues to get ourselves warmed up and get going, so I was listening to what he was doing. Whenever I'm playing with another artist, the first thing that you've got to do is listen. Listening is the most important thing a musician can do, first and foremost. Listen to the other guy. Listen to what's going on, you know? Yeah. And as a guitar player, we've all got acoustic guitars. They're all different. They all have different pickups. We all have different ways of playing. So if you're playing with other people who, you know, are, say, have a much more gentle approach than you, or whatever, then you've got to adjust the way you play. So if you can't hear every detail of what the other player is playing, then you're playing too loud, right? The other thing is, I like to have a fairly big sound, right? Yeah. With the full spectrum of frequencies. But when, say, for instance, if I was going to play a song with John, and he was going to take some single line melody stuff, I would instantly strip down my backing. So I would virtually come to playing like almost a bass part. Like,
well, could we see something like that?
Right?
Yeah.
So he doesn't need me to be going. You know what I mean? It's too much. We don't need all that.
Right. Well, let's see if you guys can kind of get something going there.
We can play over any chord you like, Johnny. Any chord?
As long as it's D.
Because Laurence likes D. There's something. Why don't we, just to confuse him, let's go to E flat. Ready? The reason why we can hand it round like that is because we all know the chords, right? And then it's a matter of listening. And when because John's not plugged in, so I'm struggling to hear him. So I played less and less. I ended up going just like that.
Just so you could hear.
Yeah. So and then the second time round, I heard Laurence go. So he was doing the other part that I wasn't doing, right? He jumped.
Like the right hand of the piano.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, and that's what we did. It's all about listening to each other.
And the second part of listening though is making your own sort of musical statement.
Yeah.
And kind of creating those lines in the moment. Can one of you guys talk a little bit about how you construct those lines, once you know the chords, you've got the basic structure.
Yeah.
Then what do you do?
John, what do you get up to between your ears when when I throw you a solo? What happens?
Yeah, well, when it's an E flat, I first think I wish I would have had more coffee. No,
Brother Doyle Dykes, here.
Doyle Dykes.
come on.
Yeah, we're gonna get another chair for Rory here while we're doing
Who's
this.
sitting here?
Little housekeeping here. Everybody doing okay so far? Yeah. Can I get anybody anything? Yeah. Security.
Well, years ago when I was getting a sound on my guitar, and I put the headphones on, and instead of asking me if I'd like a little reverb, Chet said to me, "Hey Tommy, would you like some talent on that?" That's what he used to call reverb, talent.
This is Rory Hoffman.
Well, champion.
Okay, so we're talking about sort of constructing lines, and once you have the basic foundation and structure of the song. John, you were about to get into your head there.
Yeah, so whatever key the song is in, say. So when you're playing blues, there's just 3 chords: the 1, the 4, and the 5. And so it's good to know the neck of your guitar, so that you can know where the 1, 4, and 5 is in any key. That really helps. And so when you're on the 1 chord, it's good to play the 1 note. So if you're in E flat, it's good to play E flat. Only if not just to let everyone know that you know where you are, because the audience gets more comfortable if they think you know what you're doing, right? And so then you can build from there and say, Tommy was throwing it a little bit more jazzy, so blues can be anything from like the most basic country and Delta blues to really extended jazz harmonies. And Tommy was pushing it a little bit toward the jazz side. So that means that I would add some more colorful notes. The main notes that you would play are usually the root, the 3rd and the 5th, and then you might add the 7th. And then if you want to get even more colorful, then you add the 9th and the 11th and 13th. And then you alter some of those notes too. You can flat them or sharp them. And but you have to kind of listen again and see how much advanced the other players are playing the harmony. Because if you throw it in, if you're really playing like a country blues and you throw in really altered notes, then it just sounds like you're not tasteful and not paying attention.
Sounds like you're from the city.
Yeah. So again, it's hopefully what you do with your solo even still complements the backing too, even as the backing complements the solos.
So can we try something with a different groove?
Yeah.
Something.
What I'd like to do is get this microphone on Rory's guitar going.
Yes.
Where's our sound guy?
There you go.
There we go.
There you go.
You get a little more on that?
Yeah, just add mid-range. Just turn the mids up and you can hear it. There he is.
Okay. So something with a slightly different groove than what we have.
Let's play Sugarfoot Rag.
Okay.
the English version of the Ventures. You know, they would have played surf music, but we didn't have any surf. and it was, you know, kind of parallel acoustic and electric. I mean, there was Clapton and Hendrix and, you know, George Harrison, and then, but also early Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, the folk pickers, you know, the finger picker, and Bert Jansch, John Renbourn. A little bit later, Merle Travis. It took me a long time before I actually really got into Chet's playing. Merle Travis was kind of my introduction to thumb picking, but I was really more on the kind of the English folk baroque side of things.
Tommy,
Yes, sir.
who inspired you to play guitar?
Oh, well, I had the same thing. The Shadows, it was Hank Marvin was the lead player, and Bruce Welch was the rhythm player. And I wanted to be Bruce, and my brother wanted to be Hank. You see, we modeled ourselves on that. I was the rhythm player, and I played all the, you know. And it's actually an interesting story, because when I first heard record, we've got to remember I'm 4 and 5 years old, and so the first music I heard and the music on the radio, I wasn't aware of the bass guitar. I thought the rhythm player covered the bass, and so it was like a happy accident. Every song that I worked out the bass part. Right, so there was a song my brother and I used to play by the Shadows called "The Savage," and the bass player went like that, and the rhythm was. But what I heard was right, so I worked it out, and so when I was playing rhythm, my brother's playing melody, and my other brother's playing drums, we sounded like a quartet. Right? And it was an accident, you know. It was like that's how I heard music. And then, of course, when I was a little bit older, I heard Chet going, and I worked out how to do that, because my ears were already thinking that way, that bass and melody is. Is going to happen together.
Yeah.
Most people said, don't take any notice to that, it's a recording trick, it's them damn Yankees.
It's our fault.
Yeah, it's your fault. No, it was Chet, you know.
Yeah.
And then, and I said, no, I think he's playing everything at once, you know. So with a straight pick, I started that way. Like that. I was about 10, I think, when I saw my first Chet Atkins album. And there he was with a thumb pick on, and it was like, okay. You know, so it became a lot more adventurous then.
Yeah. Well, speaking of listening and you know, hearing things and arranging for what you might uniquely hear, I want to talk with Laurence a minute, because Laurence, as many of you know, is well known for arranging, among many other artists, Beatles songs. Put out two albums of Beatles tunes, and I'm wondering kind of what your listening process is, what you're listening for to make those songs guitaristic.
It's kind of the opposite of the collaboration, because you're taking a collaboration and making it soloistic. And I just listen to all the parts, listen to the bass and the melody, and the texture of it, and then figure out how all those things can fit together. And sometimes, I mean. It's right there for you.
Yeah.
And I just took, you know, what's on the record and just made it, you know, work on the guitar. And I didn't have to change anything, because it's clarinets and it's piano, and you know, it just everything sits in the right place. But other times it just takes a lot of work. But really it boils down to getting the texture, the melody, the bass, getting the harmonic structure, and getting the physical structure of it. Because sometimes you really go, like, they don't always follow the rules. Like I Am the Walrus doesn't adhere to a strict structure. All of a sudden there's this kind of extra little bridge that happens in one place. And so mapping it out really helps.
Yeah.
You know, and I read music, and I often will write the stuff down, especially if I know it's going to be published. Then I'll start on the computer and actually like look at it on the page, but it's still got to work under the fingers.
Sure.
But I think that for me, because I didn't come into this as a solo player, I started as my ambition was to be a studio musician. So I always listened to records and deconstructed records, and then when I started playing with other people, which was very early on, you know, I was 13, and I'm on the bandstand for the first time, and the bass player leans over and says, "If you don't know the chords, lad, just play the bridge of I've Got Rhythm." Which is, it's rhythm changes, cycle of fifths and stuff, and so you kind of learn the formulas,
right?
And then you just internalize that stuff. When you hear those changes, those chord changes, you know what to do. So it's, and then then bringing it back into the solo guitar, it's just all that information just is kind of distilled.
Mm-hmm. Let's. I want someone to start with a song, perhaps, that you remember early on, whether it was, Hank Marvin or something from way back, and see if you guys can work together. was fun.
That was.
Apache.
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 That's right. Who wrote that song?
Jerry Lorden. Jerry Lorden, didn't he write?
Jerry Lorden. Did
Jerry
he?
Lorden.
Yeah.
Okay, questions? Questions? Yes, sir.
John, you mentioned something about texture. Could you give some examples of change of texture?
Texture.
Well, actually, I mean, you want to be style appropriate with things. And, on a very basic level, we touched on this earlier, if you're playing bluegrass, the G7 chord is going to be that. But if you're playing swing, it's going to be like that. And that's a different, it's the same chord, but the texture of it is different, If you were comping, you might just do it, in a very small, even just two notes. You don't even need the bass, the bass player will carry.
Yeah.
So you have to know kind of how to gauge it. Like
It's being sensitive to the style that you're...
Yeah, or it might be something where you're picking. Or you know, as opposed to a strum or whatever. Or it might be that if you're playing rock, you know, you might not play the third in the chord. This might play power chords, you know. And then you've got more mass mojo.
It's good to have mass mojo. I'm working my way up to that. Another question. Okay, no, yes.
Yeah, I got a question for Tommy.
Yes, sir.
That CD that you recorded with Chet Atkins,
Yes,
Day
sir.
Figure Pictures, one of my favorites. I've listened to it so many times. Tell us another story about Chet Atkins. What was it like recording with him? Was he the guy that would just do one?
Well, it was. Sometimes I still look at that CD and wonder if it really happened. You know, the day that I got the call about it, you know, I almost called the ambulance and went to the hospital. But it was a great experience. It was tough for Chet because he was struggling with his health, and you know, he wrote me beautiful notes. He wrote a note once we'd made up our mind that we were going to work together, and the record company Columbia that we were both signed with, they had approved everything and said, okay, you guys do it however you want, and you know, there's an open-ended budget kind of thing. We decided that we would record everything at Chet's house, and then we would mix it with Chuck Ainley, who worked for Mark Knopfler in those days. And so he wrote me this note saying that he was very concerned that I would feel uncomfortable playing with such an old-fashioned guy. And he said, you'll have to bend back to meet me somewhere way back in your past, because I'm a dotted, he said, I'm a dotted eighth note kid from the 30s and 40s. That's what he wrote in the note to me. And I rang him and I said, listen, I'm going to get these tracks as good as I can, and you just have fun with them. You just do what you do, and it's going to be great. Don't worry about it, you know. So my job was to try to make it as easy as possible for him, because he was, you know, struggling so much with his health. But he was there every day, and when he felt good, he had so much to say and to contribute, you know. Once we'd chosen the songs, I then hired a young guy who could come in and program keyboards and a bass drum and a hi-hat part, and then I just filled in the rest. I overdubbed playing the brushes on a tape box, right? So it had a sound of a real drummer, and then I just used the computer to make the bass drum and the hi-hat sounds. I did everything else myself. I put a guide bass part on, then I put rhythms down, and then what I did is I mapped out each track where Chet would play, and then once I got the track done, and I got my part done, I would then do an impersonation of his part for him so he could hear what he had to do. And then and I made a tape for each song with a little map of what he had to do. And I set them out in the studio in order so he could do one song at a time when he felt like playing, you know. When we did Waltzing Matilda and Smoky Mountain Lullaby, we were actually just sitting side by side playing live. They were just one take, straight down, and that's it. But the rest of the album, I had to piece it together, and then I had to go back to Australia for a tour. So I just left everything there as easy as possible for him to do his parts. And when I came back, after the tour, I came back in to mix the album. And when I arrived into Nashville pretty late, about midnight, and when I got to the house, I was staying at the little granny flat beside Chet's house, and on my bed was Chet's Del Vecchio resonator guitar and his AKG 414 microphone, and a little note from him saying, if I've missed anything, can you, or I've done something wrong, can you fix it? You know, he was already in hospital. So I took his guitar to mix, and there was a couple of parts where he'd done the harmony the first time round and then forgot it the second time, you know, so I had to drop it on and stuff like that. But it was easy, And but he did a great job on that album, in spite of his health. You know, he was struggling with his health. But it was a great experience for me, and I learned so much. And one time I was trying to go for a solo on the song "To Be or Not to Be," and I had about 4 goes at it, and I wasn't happy with my solo. And Chet came down and poked his head around the corner and had a little listen, and I said, "Have you got any ideas for me?" like that. And he said, "Yeah, you can't beat the melody." And then he walked away. So I started my solo with the melody, and I got it the next take. And that's what he was like. He would never say to any of us, "You should do it this way." He would never do that. But he'd always say, "Did you ever think about trying this?" You know, he was such a gentleman, you know. And
Well, speaking of Chet, can we play a Chet song?
oh, sure we can. What do you want to play? You want to I'm just playing the microphone.
You can hear this?
Doyle with the endless stream of incredible licks there for you. Did you see them go by you? He was channeling Jet there.
Well, we should. I'm trying to find a way that we can get everybody together on one piece and see where that goes. Who wants to try and pick a tune here that everybody can join in on? And then we'll get some more questions
easy.
from the house.
That's easy.
in addition to the remarkable display of playing here, to my ear, each of you has a distinctive voice on the guitar. And if you were each to give some advice about developing your voice on guitar, what would it be? John, even though you're not playing guitar.
Well, I would say listen to all different kind of music and take little bits of everything that you like and try to make your instrument sound like a different instrument sometimes, make it sound like a voice or a trumpet or a saxophone. I think if you don't try to copy one player, then you'll have a better chance at bringing in all the influences that you like. It's kind of like a cook. Everybody can make the same dish, but everybody uses the ingredients in a slightly different way. And
I think, if I may say so, Johnny, I think that it's nature's way that we all start out emulating someone. That someone inspires us, and we all want to emulate that. Whoever. Some people start out listening to blues music, classical music, whatever. We all have to emulate someone to get started, and somewhere down the track, with experience, with knowledge, with practice, with work, somewhere we find our voice. And when we find our voice, it's a wonderful thing, because then we know who we are and where we're going with this voice. And it seems to be that some people find their voice early, and some people spend their whole life trying to find it.
Yeah. Doyle, for you, how'd you develop your voice on guitar?
Well, after listening to Chet Atkins, Merle Travis, Les Paul, all these guys all through the years, one thing I noticed that they did was stay with the melody.
Yeah.
And I found out when you have a piano player backing a vocalist, they don't play as loud as the vocalist is singing, or they shouldn't. It's basically like if Chet were doing. The lead line is always louder, and the other guys are backup. And so, as Chet said, he was a sucker for a melody, and I think as long as that's up front, it's just very important. And to give that melody line a voice. I did it best when I switched over to acoustic guitar. Nobody ever paid any attention when I was playing electric guitar, even though I play a lot more electric now than I used to, even a few years ago. But when I started playing the same thing, like, and just doing it on the acoustic guitar, wow, we never heard it,
Bring something different out.
Yeah, on the acoustic guitar. So I think the guitar had a lot to do with that for me.
Yeah. Lawrence, you spent a lot of time, working in sessions and working on other people's projects, and yet you still develop your own unique approach. How did that work for you?
I think the kind of the epiphany was when I started working in altered tunings.
Oh.
And I just found a different kind of voice. Right. It was a little different. And because my approach, like to DAC tuning, wasn't coming from like emulating Davy Graham or Jimmy Page, but it was just, what can I do with this? It's a good tool. And then I discovered, people started telling me that I had a voice, because I didn't recognize it for myself.
Yeah.
Because I was used to being something of a chameleon. I could just kind of find, whatever the style was. But I think that at the root of it was that as much as I would be inspired by different players, I just learned how to fake it. So once I figured out kind of how a particular player got their sound or what the basis of their style was, I didn't then try and copy it note for note, but I just wanted to get the character of it and then kind of just do it for myself.
Because it is all ultimately filtered through you.
Yeah.
And what you bring.
Yeah, but it's hard to be objective about what you do.
Yeah. So, Joe, tell me a little bit about, because actually we've had the pleasure, if I might be so bold, to see you and hear you develop over time. You started with us here at Guitar Town when you were even younger than you are now, which is hard to believe. Said as a geezer. So tell us a little bit about your.
Yeah, I think, for me, it's like, I was always really bad at learning things verbatim. So whenever I'd learn a piece, I would always think, how can I use these ideas to create my own songs? And yeah, I just try to write as many songs as I can and pieces that challenge me technically on the guitar and different ideas. And I think, that's a never-ending journey. I've come to Guitar 22. This is my 3rd year, I think.
Yeah.
And each time I bring something different to the table, I think.
So it's really very much about listening to everything, trying tunings, being as experimental as you can be, with yourself.
Well, one kind of main thing is you have to practice.
Well, there is that. Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter how good ideas you have, if you can't execute the ideas, then, and the more technique and the more your technique doesn't get in the way of your ideas, the better those ideas are going to come out.
Right. And Rory, maybe Tommy, can you slide your mic there? Rory, you, in addition to playing guitar, you play almost every other instrument on the planet. So talk about, because your approach is utterly unique, talk about developing your voice.
It is, and I've had a lot of people tell me, not just because of the way I play guitar, but the things I do on guitar. Sometimes it, depending on what I'm doing, comes off kind of pianistic because I'm also a piano player, and so I'll do like chord voicings, like tight voicings that a piano player would do that a guitar player might not do. Just because I can reach, a weird chord like that, or I can reach a really far chord like this. And so sometimes, I'll do lines that counterpoint each other. And stuff that other people don't do because they don't have that access. And, some other things that, make me sound different is if I am finger picking something, because I have the guitar tuned normally, the melody notes are happening with my thumb, which will give you a different texture. It'll just sound different. So I can get different sounds because I'm using different fingers for different things than normal guitar players do, which, that's some of what gives me my unique approach. And some of it is just, I kind of really have a go for broke attitude. So I'm like, if I go for something and I fail, then I'll go for it again and try to not to. And, but I kind of have I don't try to play safe, even like when I'm on stage. If I'm going for a lick of some kind that I have in my mind, I'll just go for it. And if it doesn't come out well, then I'm human.
Some of us might dispute that, but that's okay.
Rory has the hands of an orangutan.
All right, so
he knows how to use them.
So do we have a couple more questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm curious as to where formal theory versus improvisation and the contrast of those two things came into play when there's some of these wonderful elaborate voicing that you guys are doing.
So formal training versus what you just pick up by your ear.
Well, I haven't had any formal training, and I don't read music at all. If you asked me to play a Mixolydian mode, I wouldn't have a clue. But I can tell you, I bet you I use it. I just can't name it. It's really, I'm just looking for sounds in my head, and as an improviser, I always tell people, if you want to learn about improvising, because people say, how do you get all these ideas? And I said, well, I stole most of them from people who do it well. So if you want to learn how to be a good improviser, steal everything you possibly can from great improvisers and figure out where that idea comes from and how those notes work against those chords,
Laurence.
I find that if I sing along with what I'm playing, then it gets what's in my head into my fingers.
Huh.
Yeah.
And it also, that way I'm not thinking about what I'm playing next. And it's not that mechanical part of the brain. And I've learned a lot actually from working with actors, and years ago I took some comedy improvisation classes, and the thing I came away with was to add information. That it's like you want to keep spinning things out, and we were talking about Albert Lee, And the fact that Albert never repeats himself, and there's just this constant flow of musical information, and that's truly being in the improvisational moment. And you can always tell when you're playing with somebody who's got an agenda, you know, and it's like they're going for the thing that they've prepared, but the great improvisers are the ones that just are in that moment, and things happen. And that's what makes it really satisfying, when it goes somewhere you don't expect.
Sure.
Your question about formal theory as opposed to learning by ear, well, I don't think it matters how you come across something or how you learn it. If you learn it from a book, or if you learn it by ear, if you learn it from a friend showing you, it doesn't matter.
No,
if it sounds good, it sounds good. Use it.
That's right.
And everything can be helpful. You know, don't get bogged down with theory. Don't get bogged down with your ear. You know, just use everything you can, and you'll get further along.
We got time for one more question. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask Laurence, how many different alternate tunings do you use, and what are your favorites, and how does all that work for you?
As few as possible. Basically DAG-GAD, C, G, D, G, A, D, which is DAG-GAD with the bottom two strings down a whole step. And occasionally I've used like open G minor, which is D, G, D, G, B flat, D. But I don't I'd rather dig deeper into DAG-GAD than just, you know, use a million different tunings. It's not really where I come from. For me, it's standard tuning in DAG-GAD, which is like the other standard tuning. And I just learned, you know, I've gone to jam sessions and just played in DAG-GAD, so I forced myself into thinking on my fingers, as it were. But really, that's about as far as it goes.
So we got time here for one more sort of giant get-together here. I don't know who wants to kick it off and see where it leads. Somebody have a song? Joe.
Play minor swings.
Django version or Crystal version?
The Django version or
Thank
the
you.
Wristed version?
Who wrote it originally?
Yeah, Django.
And that's said by somebody holding a mandolin, so there you go. 1, 2, 3, 4.
you.